Cool. All right. So we are now broadcasting and it is live on YouTube. So you can share the YouTube link if you want to do that and just check it. So we've got participants coming in, which is great. So welcome to the Radix AMA 19th of February 2019. This is going to be going through our questions that have been submitted via our Slido first and foremost. If anyone would like to see what those questions, you can see them on the Slido here, which is the chat panel on the right, and that's also available to view on our Telegram chat channel, which I'm going to post right now, and Sophie is going to be posting the YouTube link in Telegram chat channel too. So I'm on the phone with Dan, who is waiting for his wife to give birth. So he's on hand and on call. So unfortunately couldn't be down in London with us today. But Dan's calling in from Stoke. How you doing, Dan?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I am looking forward to the arrival of my boy. So we build Legos together and stuff.
So I think that just to start this off, obviously there's been a lot of feedback that we've got from the community since the publication of the economics paper. It's been really interesting to see what people have responded to and sort of the comments that have come back around different elements of it. I think that it's really important to say up front that there's lots of elements of the economics that sort of fit together around reasoning that I think that we need to sort of be more explicit about and actually let people sort of see where the reasons that we came to certain conclusions were. I've started that with I'm started putting together a blog post around sort of what gives something value and why money is valuable and all this kind of stuff. And then we're also going to be putting out some of our previous economic models as well, so that people can sort of investigate that and see where the iteration of previous economic models came to today. I'd say that there's sort of two key pieces of feedback that we're very cognizant of from the community. The first is around the use of fiat in the system. There's sort of almost a divide between sort of the crypto purists and what you might call the sort of the real economy or the everyday economy, in that most people live and work with fiat and they use fiat every day, and then there's this sort of the crypto purists and the Bitcoin standard of sort of limited supply, being non-centrally controlled currency that could be used as a de facto currency or replacement to currency. And where these two sort of collide is around how people go from fiat to a currency that allows you to use a network, and then how that may become currency in the future. So a lot of this sort of hangs around what we call approved minters and how the approved minters work in the system. And those approved minters are put there because on-ramps and off-ramps between the real economy and the crypto economy are incredibly important. And exchanges have kind of traditionally played this role, this ability to go between crypto and fiat. And we saw it as imperative to make that an integral part of how a system operated, because it presents this friction-free way in which people can move between the fiat-based economy and the crypto economy. However, we are cognizant of the fact that in the current draft of the economics model, we do end up having the fiat-backed token creators, the approved minters, having a very direct control over the total supply of the currency within the system, and also a direct control over determining which is the ledger of truth. And the reason that that's a concern is because if you have an approved minter, that gets to that decides which ledger, if there's multiple versions of the ledger out there, they're going to accept the fiat-backed token representation that they've minted as being legitimate. Then they have a certain degree of control over deciding which of the ledgers is the legitimate ledger and which isn't the legitimate ledger. All of these are concerns that we're really glad that the community has raised and stuff that we are actively looking at to address. However, I do want to also say, you know, the reasons, the underpinning reasons for why we wanted to create a token that is long-term value stable doesn't fundamentally go away. If you want to create a currency, it fundamentally has to be a medium of account, a unit of exchange, a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and a store of value. And I think store of value and medium of exchange is well established, as in people understand what that means. But unit of account, I'm willing to take a credit, or I'm willing to take a debt in it, is actually one of the more fundamentally important ways in which something becomes money. In that, if someone says to me, hey, I want a service, and that service I'm going to pay you for at some point in the future. If you're the debtor, if you're the person who has to pay back that in the future, you don't want the underpinning thing that you agree to pay back in the future to go up in value massively between when you agree to take the service and when you actually have to pay for the service. And this is a crucial part of how real economies work. And so you can't have something that goes up in value too much, you can't have something that goes down in value too much, and fundamentally you need to get something that's stable value. So that's fundamentally why we want it to be stable value, because that allows the system to actually start to become something money-like. And so those are the thought processes that have gone to how we first approached this system and how we wanted to, what we wanted to build as a result of that. Dan, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of things in the current draft that are very important. The ability for people to be able to on and off ramp into a decentralized system is important. At the moment, most of that does happen over exchanges, and there's been all kinds of horror stories around exchanges. I think the AMs mitigate that somewhat, because you can choose which AM you want to come in through, whereas you potentially can't with exchanges at the moment. You have to use a particular one that's in your jurisdiction, and you still have the counterparty risk of them holding them, at least with an approved mint. The tokens come to you, and you hold the tokens. So your counterparty risk is then the viability of being able to cash those back out through the approved mint. Obviously, them being very close to the supply and having this kind of control of which is the ledger of choice, the ledger of truth. I mean, that's kind of akin in a way to the miners on Bitcoin. The miners pick which is the chain of truth. If somebody makes a change to Bitcoin and the miners don't adopt it, then that fork essentially dies off. Except that here it's a bit more pronounced because they're also in control of the supply and a lot of the economy. So ultimately, regardless of what people may think about the AMs right now, I think they're still very important in however we move forward from this current draft based on the feedback that we've had.
So I think that we should probably dive into some of the questions that we've got. They've been sort of like voted on Slido, and we'll sort of bang through. The first question was there any reason to use a VC when money could have been raised in the community? What was the deal the VCs received? What do these VCs bring to the table? There's a simple answer to that, and there's a longer answer to that. The simple answer to that is that they were offered equity in Radix DLT Limited, which is the entity that both Dan and myself and all of the team are also employed by. The full details of exactly what that company does and how it works is at the back of the Radix Economics paper. And if you're selling equity, which is a security, there are a load of rules behind how you offer that equity. So one of the ways that we could do that would be via sort of an equity crowdfunding platform or something like that. Ends up being quite a lot of work. It is something that we want to do in the future, and we would like to be able to offer things to the community, but the upfront work in doing that does mean that you tend to have to move a bit slower to do the fundraising. The other thing that VCs offer is access. It tends to be what you would call smart money. So mentorship, people have been there, done that. People who have actually grown fast-growing startups and can give advice, can give introductions, be able to give advice for people that need to come in at different times, being able to provide recruitment resources. So if we have a job that needs filling, very often you get access to a network of people who have been in startups before and are now looking at the next opportunity, and we've been able to sort of tap into those resources. Also introduction to other companies that can help in what we're doing now or what we'll be doing in the future. All of those can be incredibly helpful if you have the right venture capital backer. But as I say, community involvement in being able to offer equity to them is something that we want to do, and it's something that we're working on, but it will probably be the next round. Dan, do you have anything you want to add to
that? No, actually, summed it up pretty good. There's reasons for institutional investment, there's reasons for venture capitalists, and there's reasons for community investment, and they all carry different pros and cons. And I think it's important, though, that as a company, you don't just pick one and go with that, because you might be doing yourself a longer term disservice by not going with one of the other alternatives.
Yeah, so the deal was $2.5 million at a $25 million cap on a convertible note. The second question was, can we link a representative node to our main wallet that could claim our interest and not put our funds on the grid to avoid them being hacked?
Ooh. I mean, somebody somewhere has got to hold those funds, right? So somebody somewhere has a private key for those funds, and somebody somewhere can potentially get hold of that private key. The question doesn't really go into a lot of detail about why you would want to do this and for what purpose. I mean, you could have a custodian of your currency, or you could even potentially just leave that in the system for you to claim it at a later date when you're ready. It is a ledger after all, so the system always knows how much you're owed and how much you've been paid from that debt that is owed to you, or in this case, the redistribution. So potentially the safest thing to do is to just leave it sitting and claim it later. That's probably the way I would. Just
to be clear on that, you don't have to claim every period, right? You can wait for
a number. So I think that there will be a minimum waiting duration, otherwise everybody will be claiming what they're owed every 5 minutes, and there'll be 1 million transactions per second, which is just everybody claiming their pennies. So there is like a minimum duration of an economic period, but you don't have to claim it. You could potentially set your client to say, don't automatically claim, I'll claim it when I'm ready. But then you still have the problem that if somebody has your private key that those funds relate to, then they can still potentially claim. If they steal your key, they can claim all of your kind of historic reserves of supply redistribution that you have. So it's a tricky problem, right? Because you want to make sure that your funds are safe somewhere later on, and they're not particularly associated with you. But the means by doing so either leaves you open to risk, either if it's a counterparty risk, if it's the risk of you losing your private key. And unfortunately, there's always a kind of audit trail. So one of the things that could potentially mitigate that would be the rollout of stronger privacy in the future. So if you're able to guard your identity and who you are, then there's you can break that kind of paper trail, if you like, of what funds you're owed and where they are and how many of them you've claimed. So that's obviously down the road a little bit from here. So it's a difficult problem to solve. That
you can, I think one of the things that is being posited here is like I want to be able to keep my funds in a cold wallet, and I want it not necessarily to be connected at all. That's not a problem, right? Like you could come back in 5 years' time and claim.
Yeah.
Stage 2 is set up for an initial dump in price as investors take interest profit, leaving many stage 1 investors underwater for an indefinite period of time. So this is sort of saying if stage 1, you're selling at $1 via the approved minters all the way through stage 1, at stage 2, when the DEX goes live, won't there be an initial dump when everyone just comes in and sells essentially at whatever the market can take, all the way down to P minimum, where it will then hit against P minimum and won't necessarily recover for an extended period of time. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think you will get some people cashing out. I suppose it also depends on how long stage 1 is. If stage 1 is very short, then it may not be quite as drastic as it may be if stage 1 is very long. I suppose, you know, in the period between stage 1 starts and finishes, all different manner of things can happen to somebody, kind of financial lifestyle that they need to cash out. I think over the longer term, if you're a smart individual and you've got in at stage 1, then you're probably not going to want to crash out straight away, because then you're just taking cents on the dollar anyway, right? You've bought in at $1, you've got some redistribution supply from other people after you coming in and buying up. But even if you crash out too hard, then you're going to end up at a loss anyway, and somebody else is going to profit from that loss, because now they can buy them from you for 20 cents on the dollar, or wherever P-min is, and you paid $1 for them, and they don't have to pay $1 for them now because they're very bullish on where it's going to go afterwards. So I think you will get some locking in of returns, but I don't think it will go all the way down to P-min, because that would just be quite irrational.
I mean, if it did go all the way down to P-min, it's actually overall helpful to the system in that it reduces the total supply. Every time you hit P-min, you're going to be burning supply and reducing the total supply, which means that you're increasing the scarcity of the RAD, which long-term, provided that the network is needed to be used, as in there is traction for the network and people are getting utility out of it and they are spending fees on the network, you will eventually get to a certain point where there has to be more demand than there is supply, because actually the use of the network itself is deflationary. Every time you spend, 50% of what's being spent on the network and fees gets pulled out of circulation. That's a choice between, you know, donating it to the foundation to continue the development of the system, or between burning. But either way, you're removing it from circulation. You don't get to recycle it for the next time that those fees have to be spent, and you will get to the point where there is a scarcity in the market that means that there's demand is greater than supply. That could be a long period, and one of the things that we have constantly tried to make clear about the system is that it will be volatile at the start. We're not saying that it will start off as being low volatility right from day one. And so and stage 1 certainly is of higher risk than stage 2, which means that some people will decide that they want to come in stage 1 because they want to be part of the system early, and other people decide that they want to come in later on. The other thing I'll say is that you'll always be able to see what P minimum is, or at least work out what P minimum is even in stage 1, because you can see what the reserves are and you can see what the total supply is. So you can continuously make that decision as whether or not it's something that you want to come in on, or that you want to wait until the next period and just be part of the market when that's live.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of discussions on Telegram and everywhere, all of our social channels, about this potential stage 2 dump. And really, if that happens, it's only bad for the people getting out, because they're going to be selling at cents on the dollar. So, like, if there's a large amount of XRD, XRI in the market, and it all disappears because these guys are getting out because they're locking in their value, and I'm left and I've got 1,000, and it all goes, 999,000 of it disappears, and there's just me left in the system with 1,000. On the next inflow, that actually benefits me, because then I'm the only guy left in the system. So my amount of redistribution that I get from that point forward will be quite high, because there's only me in the system at this, but everybody else is left. So a dump seems bad, but for those left over that hold and that don't leave, it's actually beneficial to them, because they can then maximize redistribution on the next inflow.
It's an interesting dynamic when you think about large dumps moving out of the market, a large amount of RADs being burnt, small number of holders being left, meaning that those small number of holders are the main people who receive the any redistribution that may happen the next time the inflow comes. So yeah, I'd encourage people to play around with what happens in sort of large dumps with large exoduses of RADs, but maintaining a small number of people holding. It's quite fun, the output of that. The next question is, can you tell me more about the requirements for a permitted minter or approved minter? How do you assure that they will not run away with the collateral? It's a really good question. So approved minters, we will be putting out more material around approved minters in the next sort of month or so. But one of the basic requirements is, are you regulated in your jurisdiction to hold, to be a custodian of funds? And the regulation in any jurisdiction around the custodian of funds generally covers, if you are regulated, covers the protection on people running away. So there's different levels of regulation in that space. You've got the sort of the high end of them, which is sort of people like Gemini and Paxos, who are under the Bit license, as well as being sort of regulated financial institutions for being custodians of funds. And then you've got sort of the next level below that, which are using regulated custodians as separate third parties, but then provide the token on-ramp and off-ramp, but don't actually have control of the money. Again, a regulated ring fence around the money. And we'd only really be looking at institutions that can demonstrate a minimum level of trustworthiness, as in they are regulated to do so, for holding representations of fiat in the system to be an approved minter. That doesn't mean that anyone can't come along and create their own fiat-backed token. I could come along and create a peer's fiat-backed token and not be a regulated entity, but then you ultimately would not end up being selected as an approved minter. Next question. Is the protocol for the debit cards point of sale feature still EMV, or has it changed?
So we haven't actually done much work on the POS systems for quite a while now. We're aiming to obviously get to an MVP that we can launch as quickly as possible, and the rollout of those EPOS terminals just isn't in scope for that. I don't imagine that it will change too much from what the prototype was like. It worked very well. It did what it needed to do. We can integrate it quite seamlessly into the Radix core so that those machines can communicate efficiently. So there's nothing changed on the core side that means that current implementation of that technology won't work. It just isn't in scope for launch. So we haven't really done much on it since then, other than we did some investigation around different card manufacturers that we can use so we can reduce costs and that kind of thing, but nothing too active on development at this stage.
Yeah, and I'd recommend that you turn your light on. You're getting quite dark there.
Yeah, it goes dark quick in Stoke, right? Because the sun's gone down now.
Yeah, so the debit card system for Radix, when Dad says it's not in scope for launch, is basically not in scope for our technical go live, because one of the things that you constantly want to do when you're building a startup is really focus in on a small minimum viable product that allows you to go to market and then expand out the feature set from there. This is something that we think is really important and really interesting, this ability to hold crypto on cards and then without the need for like a Visa or MasterCard payment rail being able to make payments, and really draws on Dan's sort of experience with working with payment card technology prior. But it's one of those things that if the ledger isn't working properly, and if we don't have the proper on-ramps and off-ramps, and we don't have the ability for people to send around tokens and hold tokens in wallets, then the next stage of it doesn't really matter so much. It's getting the basics right before you then build the infrastructure around that makes it really easy for like your grandma to pick up and use the crypto.
Yeah, it was just a proof of concept. Is it possible to do? Yes. Great. Okay. Push it there. Let's focus on the more important.
What is the goal of the RAD Can't this goal be achieved with fiat tokens 100% stable and a fixed quantity of RADs where operations in Radix pay gas taxes in RAD? So basically, why do we want to create the RAD as a stable token? Why not just use fiat as the like fiat tokens instantly being traded into RADs to pay for some gas fees, but otherwise the RAD can fluctuate in value.
So yeah, I mean, I've seen this, and this happens in a few proposals as well that I've read of other projects and what they're working on. If you're using fiat tokens, then fiat isn't truly stable, right? It's an inflationary currency. The buying power of it reduces over time, sometimes unpredictably, depending on what's going on in the larger economy that currency is for, like quantitative easing or recessions and all this kind of stuff. And you obviously have a lot of counterparty risk with US dollar as well. Can you move it around? Can you cash it back out to actual dollars? Is there any friction there? If you can't, then you'll get instability in the value of that dollar token. So a lot of people might remember back in the day when Bitcoin was traded on BTC before it was shut down, and then it was traded on, say, Poloniex, and the price of Bitcoin on BTC always trailed the rest of the crypto economy, because getting your dollars out of BTC was such a pain in the ass. So even in the same ecosystem, you find that dollars or stable assets aren't really stable because you have all this other risk going on. Then you get arbitrage between those exchanges and all kinds of nightmares. So while from a kind of 10,000 foot view that will work, our ultimate goal isn't to be pegged to the dollar and inherit all the problems with the dollar or the euro or anything else. Ultimately, we want to be stable against a basket of things, which can be a dollar and it can be a euro, but it can also be grain and it can be gold and it can be some internal, Rad Dogs token that's doing very well that happens to have a lot of value. So using US dollars and fiat at the beginning was just the first step of the entire process. And that's still the goal, regardless with what our any modifications that we make to this economics model is. It is still, we don't want to be pegged to the dollar. We want to be relatively stable in a first-class currency in its own right, that eventually is a representation of a basket of things and the GDP of the entire Radix economy. So just, you could do that simple thing and it would probably work to a sufficient degree if your economy was quite small. But once the economy got big, then you'd have a lot of reliance on the US dollar actually staying stable.
There's also a wider issue here. Like, if you make it so that you're only going into the gas when you need to use the system, and there's no other reason that you're holding that token, you've essentially got an incredibly high velocity on the underlying crypto. So while you can say, oh, this is something that could be speculated on, it actually doesn't, it's not a very good store of value, because all people want to do is get out of it. Like, I as a business user don't care about the RAD. I don't care about holding the RAD. I just want to go straight into it, pay for the use of the network and get out. And on the other side, I as a node runner, because this thing is moving around so much in value, and I have no idea what my revenue is going to be. I just want to get out of it as soon as I get it. I don't want to hold it, because the more something goes up and down, the more volatile it is, the less time people want to hold a thing. And the more you increase the velocity of anything within the system, where it's not being used up with use, right? It's going around, and sure, there is some burn every time you're using it, but you're essentially recycling. Every time you're doing that, you're basically just a value transference mechanism. And the value transference mechanism is only as valuable as the total amount of value that needs to be transferred at any given moment. So you're not actually conferring any of that residual value onto the underlying token. You're just having it cycled through. And the more volatile it is, the faster people want to do that. So you're actually just pushing volatility straight into the underlying token and make it very unlikely for it to capture any value of the system. The only way that you capture value of the system is by making people want to hold things long term. And they're only going to want to hold things long term if it's not going to be unpredictable. And it's like, wow, this could be worth nothing tomorrow. So why would I hold it? Like, why is this a good store of value? It's not. It's a terrible store of value.
Yeah, your XRD in this scenario would be an order of magnitude more volatile than the XRR.
Right.
For the reasons you said.
Right. During phase one, what will be the percentage of surplus reserves going into the new reserve versus redistribution? Is it a 50-50 or other? I mean, that's defined by an algorithm that's in the mathematical section of the economics paper. Please go there. It's too complicated for me to just say on this AMA, but it is very well defined in the paper. PMIN won't get to 0.9 without billions of RADs being bought at 1.1. Is 1.1 is the ceiling price. What incentive does anyone have to buy at the ceiling price?
Is for me or is this for you?
This is for you.
Oh, for me. Okay, so I would guess that, I mean, if you wanted to come into the market and there is nobody selling below the ceiling price, right? So there's a large spread between the asks and the bids. Then your only option is to bid up because you want to get hold of XRI, right? Now, the reason why somebody might want to do that could be a variety of reasons, right? It could be to speculate with it. It could be they want to actually use it for something. They have a kick-ass application that they want to go and use, and that requires them to have XRI or XRD. So there's a whole basket of reasons why somebody might be prepared to pay up to $1.1 for their XRD. So on the flip of that, there is a backside to them being able to do that. So if they're buying up against 1.1, then their kind of incentive for doing that is that the P-min of them doing so will also increase slightly as well. So if P-min is, say, low and somebody buys up to 1.1, then their purchase of that XRD at 1.1 actually protects their XRD a little bit more than it did previously. That effect obviously mitigates away the closer the curve gets to 0.9 to 0.1. I would imagine that most of the activity in the market, once P-min is very high, will just bounce around between the low and the high, and it will rarely hit the high unless there's a large influx of demand and there just isn't any supply to quench that demand. But for me as an individual, I have a need for XRD, and the fact of me buying it high protects my bottom line a little bit as well.
Yeah, there's also some other factors to this. One of the interesting things you'll see in how companies want to acquire the currency that they use a system is often they don't necessarily want to be a market actor. They just want to be able to buy at a set price in a predictable manner so that they can always know what the cost of using a system is. And that predictability is more valuable than necessarily getting the best deal at every single spot instance. It's just, I know what this is going to cost me, I can budget for it accordingly, and I can use the system over the long term. So if you're not wanting to be a market actor, you just want to use the system because it's useful for you, then being able to buy at a predictable price is very valuable, and far more valuable than working out how to use the DEX and come in at whatever the spot instance happens to be at. So there's two markets here. One is the market where people are going to be market making between PMIN and PMAX, and that's a perfectly legitimate activity. And the other market where people are like, I'm not here to speculate. I'm not here to be part of this market. All I want to do is use this system. And I want to be able to know what that cost of using that system is going to be, because fundamentally I want to base a key part of my infrastructure on it. And it's that second aspect of it that we expect to be the main driver for the Radix platform, because while the speculation around what the value of the RAD is something that is interesting to a small number of people, the implication here, what we're trying to build is a platform that's ultimately useful for the world. Like, we're trying to build something that I want to base as a company or a developer key parts of my infrastructure on top of it. And I want to do that because it's scalable and because it's easy to build on and because it's price predictable. I'm not really there because like I want to be day trading on this. I'm here because I want to use this as a platform for my company. So the question, circling back again, PMIN won't get to 0.9 without billions of RADs being bought at 1.1. The question is really, is this platform something that there is going to be a large number of companies wanting to pay to use? Is this a platform that's going to be a large number of developers wanting to pay to use? If the answer is yes, then this is something that has real value, and you will benefit from part of that increase in the total use of the network by being someone who's holding RADs. Now, if that's not the case, and it's literally just another coin for people to sort of moon boy on, then it doesn't really matter. That second part doesn't really matter, because there isn't going to be billions that come in, because there isn't going to be large numbers of legitimate people who have a legitimate reason to use it. It's just going to be a small number of people who are trading around the speculative value of something that doesn't really have any function or utility beyond that speculation. And that's fundamentally not what we're trying to build here. We're trying to build something that is useful and trying to make that thing useful, so it's predictable, so that people can decide to base real businesses on top of it. And that difference between this is for the speculation or this is for businesses is where things like the PMIN and the PMAX come in, because it's fundamentally creating that predictability so that people can make those decisions. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that, Dan?
No, I think you've covered both sides pretty well. Like if it is purely just a speculation market, then it will just bounce around a lot between the two bounds, and somebody will put a buy and sell wall in the appropriate places to stop it hitting those bounds to create more supply, because that's beneficial to them as a market participant. But even if it's Moonboy coin only, eventually you will get to the point where somebody is going to be paying 1.1 for it, because the speculation frenzy is just so high because they want to enter that speculation. So it won't just be a moon as in the price goes up. There will be defined points that you're able to enter the market, maybe at an initial cost to make later benefit. And that's fine. If that's all it ends up being, then the model allows that to happen. You maybe have to change your trading mentality a little bit to extract the most from it if you're a day trader, but you can. But the main players will be institutions, because they want a known cost of doing business. So if somebody is launching a big application on Radix and they need some XRD to be able to fuel that, to give away to their users, perhaps like an airdrop, or download this app and get an XRD free, and you can go and buy a gold cat because you need that in our game, then yeah, they will just buy at the 1.1, because their return isn't the value of the coin, it's the user base and what the user base brings.
Okay. Any ETA on the Node Runner?
Yeah, so this whole economics thing caught me by surprise, actually, because we pushed the paper out, and it was like, right, okay, great, that's done. There'll be a few conversations about that, and I can concentrate on Node Runner. And then I remember I was working furiously on Node Runner for a few days, and I opened Telegram, and I think there was 4,000 messages in the chat waiting to be read. It's like, oh, damn, this is gonna. I don't know what all this is about. I wonder. It was all about economics, obviously. So a lot of time was spent in having conversations around the model. Did not expect the level of feedback, criticism, positive, negative conversations that were going on. And so Node Runner had to take a bit of a backseat for us to be involved in them. There is a candidate that's Alana's working on at the moment to go out. I believe it's good. I've been out the loop a little bit with that because I've been up and down with my wife at the hospital. Some last minute problems before Fat Boy, as to call him, arrived. He's quite a large baby. But I can definitely sync up with Zalan and find out what the status is on that release train. I know it was being executed last week. So final testing being done.
So it's probably going to be in March at this rate, but hopefully it will be sometime in March. We will be able to release our first node runner candidate that everyone can run nodes on, which would be great.
Yeah, it's just the whole economics conversation was just very high velocity. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, better get into this and look at some of reviewing the feedback that came in that we're very grateful for. That obviously takes time. With the AMA coming up, I wanted to make sure that I reviewed as much of it as possible. But that obviously meant that node runners a bit of a cost.
So from Discord, not just static but public IP. You need to accept client connections to process transactions. Any chance this is going to change in the future? Or static public IP to accept client connections and process transactions.
Yeah, so you don't need a static IP right now. I'm not sure if that's what the question is heading towards. You can use a public IP, you can use dynamic one. It doesn't make any difference in terms of the nodes and what version, IPv4, IPv6. But there is a requirement that we want to have over the long term so that it's not just IP related protocols. So we're looking at having support in the core, not initially, but so that our networking layer can support mesh networks and Zigbee and all these other kind of connectivity and communication protocols that are out there. So over the more longer term, yeah, it won't be a public IP address. It'll just be your Bluetooth MAC address, maybe, for example, your Zigbee address or whatever the fancy protocols may come out over the next decades. But you need to make sure that the core is flexible enough to allow that. So to start with, it will be TCP, UDP, and WebSockets for clients that need that. But it's very flexible networking layers so that we can move to more mesh networking stuff later on if that's what's needed. I mean, that's very beneficial in kind of more third world countries where you have a village and they don't have a great internet connection, but they still want to trade between each other. So you can have a mesh network and there's a Raspberry Pi in someone's hut that has an iPhone connected to it, and then it's using satellite uplink for actually communicating with the rest of the internet. So those kind of things are very interesting moving forward.
Okay. Next question. Q2 as a stable. Sorry, question 2. So this is the second question he asked. As a stable currency, XRI looks better than XRD. People may use XRI more over XRD. Why should they exchange it to XRD?
Because XRI doesn't have the guarantee. It doesn't have a P-min, it doesn't have a P-max. So
you could say the XRI has the guarantee of the underlying currencies, right? So like if you have a basket, then I can go into and out of the basket. Yeah,
but then but you've also got counterparty risk then, right? So if you've got an XRI and one of the mints, for example, fails or a currency fails, then the value of your XRI is severely damaged and may alter when the governance procedures take place to actually sort that out. Whereas if you've got XRD, it doesn't get affected in the same way. So if in the basket you have to remove an entirely a complete currency or asset from that basket, then that can massively change the value of the basket. Whereas if you're in XRD, then that issue is kind of mitigated.
I think there's two aspects to this as well. The first is, what is the purpose of the XRI versus what is the purpose of the XRD? If you want something that is just a pure stable token for use in the clearance and settlement of a financial trade or something like that, then the XRI is an interesting instrument. It's essentially a diversified portfolio of stablecoins, right? So that as a financial instrument for clearance and assessment and a few other things, it looks pretty interesting. However, it has no potential increase in future value. There's nothing about it that is going that represents a potential for any kind of return. The RAD, by design, if more people use the network, if the network gets traction and it becomes successful, then the RAD should also be more valuable, or has the potential to be more valuable for the people who are holding it. So if you're looking for something that is both the ability to be a store of value, as in it will not fluctuate too much around, but also provide you a return on top of that, or a potential return on top of that, then the RAD looks more attractive than the XRI. But both of them have very good functional uses in the system. And I think that both will end up being used by different people.
Yeah, it depends what your purpose of having it is, right? If you want something that's predictable and very flat line, then, and you want to take the counterparty risk, then XRI is your good bet. But then, like you say, you don't get anything for holding it, right? Your incentive for holding it is that it's stable, and the likelihood of a currency failing or an approved minter going offline is pretty slim. But for that high level of security, you pay the cost in incentives, right? And redistribution rewards. Whereas on the XRD, it's not quite as secure as an XRI, but you take that risk with the promise of you're probably going to get more of them at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Stablecoins like Tether have run into problems getting banking for their fiat money on money laundering. How will you avoid that? So this is not something that we are directly dealing with. The stable coin has been approved in a number of jurisdictions. The fact that Tether hasn't is more to do with the way that Tether is set up than it is actually regulators or jurisdictions having a problem with fiat-backed tokens. You're seeing Gemini, Paxos, TrueUSD in America. There's a number of European and Swiss companies that are starting up as well that have all been approved by regulators. The fiat-backed token, I mean, JP Morgan with their JP Morgan coin is an interesting, ironic example of a fiat-backed token. But all of these, this is already a well trodden path by a number of institutions that are operating within regulatory frameworks, and a lot of banking institutions are looking at fiat-backed tokens as well as options. So I don't fundamentally think that there's going to be a problem with the fiat-backed token. I think that there is a problem with some institutions that are creating fiat-backed tokens and the manner in which they're doing that. But that just comes down to the people who ultimately try and build them, rather than a problem with the token itself per se. Why AMT is exchanged, so improved minter token is exchanged for XRI instead of XRD. Price can be calculated from weight and DEX pairs, AMT, approved minter tokens to XRD, and the economic algorithm can trade approved minter tokens to XRD pairs to meet the approved minter tokens weight in the reserve and the difference between PMIN and PMAX. Yes, in principle, you can do that. What you're basically adding is an extra layer of complexity to the system. So in stage one, approved minter tokens are directly tradable for RADs. You don't need the XRI. The XRI doesn't exist in stage one. Essentially, just go give some dollars to an approved minter, and in principle they'll just send you back RADs. In the background, they will be going and sending those approved minter tokens to the economic algorithm, which will mint them a RAD and send them back a RAD. But in practicality, I expect most approved minters will essentially just go, you give me dollars, or give me Bitcoin, or give me Ethereum, or give me whatever, and I will send you back RADs, because there's no actual need for it to go via the user's wallet wallet, then to go to the economic algorithm back again. When the XRI is in place, you're right. Theoretically, we can have some sort of rebalancing algorithm that is a market maker between, so that it can go from approved mint token to RAD and just sort out the stuff in the back end. Auto trading across different multiple pairs on the DEX is a non-trivial problem that requires a fair amount of technical work. I know, Dan, you've looked into things like that before, right?
Yeah, being able to do that kind of, I mean, that's way too long a conversation of topic to have in an AMA. But yeah, let me tell you, it's not easy. There are these little things in economic algorithms that I call Nelsons, which is like Nelson's off The Simpsons, you know, the guy who points and goes ha ha at you. And those Nelsons and economic theories and models tend to crop up at the very last second, just when you're about to celebrate because you think you've got it cracked. And those kind of like what's been suggested in the question, that has quite a few hidden Nelsons. So
yeah, you're introducing complexity that isn't necessary to get to the final product first. It's essentially an optimization of the product to bring it to a more usable or more user-friendly version. And of course, we'll be constantly looking at those optimizations, but you kind of want to start with the easiest version of it first in terms of technical build, and then see what you can do in terms of market makers, secondary institutions to help make that easy until you're able to actually build it into the system itself.
The main problem with building economic models, it isn't so much the mechanical mathematics behind them of, okay, I've got this thing and I want it to be stable against that or represent this basket or whatever it is, it's going to be traded here. It's the game theory side of it all that just kills most models. It's not the mechanical aspects of it at all. It's just, okay, you've got all these different actors. They're all trying to manipulate the system, game it, extract as much reward as possible, inflate their position. And you've got guys that are shorting it, then you've got guys that are doing R positions, and then you've got issues with spread and how people can manipulate that and stuff. It's rarely the actual mechanical mathematical parts of it. It's always the game theory that kills it. And game theory has this weird habit of popping up at the last second just when you think you've got it cracked and laughing in your face very loudly and making you go off cry into a bottle of whiskey.
Okay, next question. Estimated time of arrival of governance paper. That's a big piece of work. I can't say exactly. I think that there's definitely an intermediate paper before that, which is going to be our security paper or white paper V2, the tempo paper V2, which is going to be a chunk of work as well. There's probably going to be a couple more versions of the economics paper, but we know that governance is really important. So I want to have it out at least 2 months before we go live. But any more than that, I can't say at this stage. If the Radix token is approximately equal to the index token, then why not get rid of the Radix token and just use the index token instead? So,
haven't we?
Yeah, I think we've covered that already. The purpose of the RAD token, the purpose of the index token are fundamentally different in the system. If the process to stabilize the volatility of the RAD will take 10 years, how can financial services be built on the platform without a stable base? Again, I think we've covered this to some extent. The first purpose of P minimum and P maximum is to provide predictable cost of using the platform to the users of the platform, the people who are actually building things, building applications, building companies on top of the Radix platform. And then the purpose of the P minimum is to make sure that if you are a provider of services, if you're running a node and you are validating transactions, that you've essentially got this SLA with the network. You being there and providing resources to the network, make sure that the network continues to function. If the price of the underlying crypto can drop so far through the floor and stay there, you essentially kill the incentive for these independent third parties to be running the nodes in the first place. And for a crypto to survive, for a decentralized ledger technology to survive, then it needs to have these rational third parties who decide to provide resources to the network. And so this P minimum is there to make sure that ultimately, as a node runner, I know I can predict what my minimum revenue is going to be. Now, it could be a lot better than P minimum, right? Because it can go up and there can be redistribution. And so there's this gap between P minimum and P maximum plus whatever the redistribution supply may happen that I also get. But ultimately, I've got this low end of being able to go, right, I know I can predict what I'm going to make. So my fixed costs and my variable cost of electricity makes sense from the point of working out whether or not I want to do it, whether or not I want to supply resources to the network. And if we just have people, if we have no one who decides that they want to be node runners, then you ultimately don't have a network. I think we're going to go through one more question. And then the rest of the questions we will do our normal right answers to and provide to everyone.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm looking for a good one. When can we build dApps with the new Atom model earliest? And once the token goes live in Q4, can we already use it throughout all eco stages in these dApps? So when the token is live, can people use that token in dApps?
So the definition of dApps is obviously very far-reaching. The Atom model allows you to do a lot of the stuff that people currently do with smart contracts and things, but allows you to do it natively with a lot less complexity. You're not reinventing the wheel and making mistakes and stuff. So that's kind of the first kind of toolbox that you'll have for creating dApps, is the Atom model itself. That Atom model is being implemented at the moment. It's quite a long way along its kind of development pipeline. The node runner that's going to be going out is based on the older legacy Atom model, and then once the new Atom model with the full constraint machine and all the kind of technical stuff that goes with that to allow us to do things like the tokens and multi-sig and structured transactions and all this kind of stuff, that'll be getting rolled out in a beta tentatively end of May-ish, once the Atom model constraint machine system is implemented. The purpose for AlphaNet is to, and the next node runner is to mainly test consensus and all that kind of stuff, and the beta net will be for us to test the kind of the Atom model and these kind of basic dApp functions and stuff. More complicated dApps will be supported by mainly Scripto in a future release post MVP, so that's not in scope for MVP. And also potentially things like where users can, developers can deploy their own kind of Atom model schemas and components they can plug in. There's still some security concerns and a can of worms there to review with that. But they're kind of like your three main tools. You'll have the Atom model, you'll have Scripto, and then potentially the ability to drop in third-party Atom model schemas to do a particular task. As for the tokens, I don't see any reason why any of the tokens that are created with Atom model during the MVP prior to Scripto are not able to be traded across all of the economic stages. I mean, they don't have any real reflection on what an XRI or an XRD is doing. There's no DEX around to start with, so they can only trade on third-party markets and secondary markets. So unless peers can think of any reason why Dan coin created on launch can't be traded freely throughout the economic periods, then I guess it's fine.
No, so from stage one onwards, any token that's created on the Radix platform can be used in any way that is enabled on the Radix platform. Just to be clear, stage one technical go live, there is only a number of restricted functions on the ledger. So the ability to create your own single issuance token, the ability to create your own multi-issuance token, and the ability to sort of access all the APIs that are around those functionalities. So you've got restricted logic on Ledger. Everything is just focused on how can you make it easy to make people make scalable tokens. Then from economic go live onwards, we start to open up the number of features sets that are available on the network. But from stage one, you can absolutely build your own tokens and deploy them, be that fiat-backed tokens or asset-backed tokens or fractionalization of ownership or equity or bonds or whatever it happens to be, all of which can be just built at stage one. And then beyond that, stage two, you can start to add logic about that as well.
Yeah, just to be clear as well, even though there's a very restricted set of features to build dApps in the MVP, we did quite a lot of digging around and, okay, so all of these applications on Ethereum or EOS and all these places, what are the fundamental components that are common between them all? And essentially, a very large portion of all of the dApps that are out there right now do the same thing in a slightly different way to one another, right? So if you can kind of capture those fundamental functions as logic in the core, as like a core part of the logic that people can build against, then you can essentially build a large portion of the current dApps that are out there right now. I think the problem with dApps is that we have a new tool to build them, but we haven't figured out what the possibilities are yet. So the very first thing that always happens with new technology is that the old stuff we used to do just gets built on the new stuff immediately. And then people are like, right, okay, I know that this works because I've got my old stuff that I had before and I know how that works and I've got it here and it works the same. So great. And then past that point, people start thinking about more exotic ways to use the tech. And that's kind of where we've come from. It's like we don't need to have a fully like bells and whistles dApp framework in there when all the dApps are doing are one or two common functions between them in slightly different ways. So that's the reason for that.
All right. So the rest of the questions we will endeavor to get answered and put out in a blog. And thank you very much for all your questions. Also, a massive thank you again for all of your feedback. I know that sort of passions have run high around some of the decisions that we've made in the economics. We're going to endeavor to continue to let everyone know the underlying reasonings for those decisions and continue to debate all of that stuff. And like everyone who's got involved in the forums and presented proposals, like really appreciate that. As we keep saying, this is just a draft. This is just our first version of it. And we do listen. We are taking into consideration everything. That doesn't necessarily mean that we will follow anything that has been put forwards or that we will necessarily change any fundamental parts of it, but we are very much open to that, and we continue to debate every day between us internally about all of the decisions that we need to make sure this is the best platform possible to build applications on top of, and ultimately for Radix to be successful. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all for joining. Thank you. Yeah, Fat Boy, I'll let everybody know when he turns up.
Cheers, guys.
Right.